rotate to various teams on the trading floor, and I really enjoyed my time at the regional sales team, and I got a full-time offer, and I've returned after graduation this year, and I joined in July.
July,
Yes.
so very new, like me. I've been here 3 months and not longer.
Yeah.
Much longer. What about you, Katrina?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Katrina. I've been here slightly longer, but not too long, 2 years. So I joined Credit Suisse as an intern. I interned here in 2015, also as a summer analyst program. I'm currently with the investment banking team, IBCM, Investment Banking Capital Markets. So we do execution of M&A, ECM, DCM transactions across Southeast Asia.
So I'm going to stop you there. It sounds very complicated, all those acronyms. Maybe you can tell people
Yeah,
what
sure,
it's
sure.
about.
So, I mean, in banking, we do have a lot of acronyms. So ECM will be Equity Capital Markets, DCM, Debt Capital Markets, and Mergers and Acquisitions, M&A. So we cover Southeast Asia in the region, and we help do both the origination and execution of deals. I was I studied here in Singapore as well, and I've been with the company for 2 years.
Great. So I did a little bit of digging on your CVs. Quite different backgrounds. So it seems to me, Katrina, that you must have always known you wanted to be in banking. You went to business school. Maybe you tell about your journey.
Yeah, sure. So I actually came from business school. It's kind of like a traditional route. So you do business school. I specialize in finance, and during my time in National University of Singapore, I really that's where I discovered my passion in banking, and specifically investment banking. I knew I wanted a role that allows me to learn on the job. I know the learning curve is quite steep, but you're always exposed to new things, and you're constantly meeting new clients across various industries and geographies. And to me, as a junior analyst, being able to sit in the same meeting as the CEOs is something that I guess not a lot of jobs out there will be able to give you, right? And I think, the fit was really well. I'm a very driven individual, and I thought that, a career in IB is something that I really wanted to start on.
Great. And you, quite different. So you've lived, I see, in Paris, in Tokyo, in the US, Hong Kong. You've worked in the fashion industry. And here you are in Singapore at Credit Suisse. What happened?
What happened?
Or as they say in Singapore, how can?
I grew up in Tokyo and in Paris, and then I graduated high school in Singapore, and then I continued my studies at Yale and US College. So I majored in economics, and I minored in global affairs. So my fashion experience, so I did an internship at a global fashion company. And that was because I was interested in how international fashion companies, everything from the marketing to the operations, that was very interesting to me. And while I was in university, I did things like Model United Nations because I was interested in the policy-making aspect of organizations. And so then I did an internship in a global investment bank in regulatory compliance, so a very different part of finance. And that was very interesting, and that's really how I got interested in finance, and I wanted to know how investment banks, their day-to-day tasks, and I wanted to see how big banks are involved in big deals that we see on like the newspaper. And so then, being part of liberal arts school in Singapore, I was interested in so many different industries, and equities or global markets is a way that I can be exposed to so many different sectors every single day. And so I applied for the program in Hong Kong, and well, now I'm here.
So no one size fits all is the takeaway.
Yes,
here.
yeah.
Great. So both of you, is it what you expected? A lot of people ask me, is it like the movies? Is it?
Well, I'd say the movies always glamorizes things, and movies portray certain aspect of the business that perhaps is accurate, but obviously a lot of it has to do with overemphasizing certain things, and you're not seeing the whole picture until you really get in there and do the job. And I'd say that even when I was in, business school, there's only so much that, the school can teach you, right? I think learning on the job, having this experience to intern with Credit Suisse was really an eye-opener, because things that you learn in school starts to come out more real, and you actually, get to apply things you've learned theoretically to real-life projects and transactions, and that to me was really exciting.
Yeah. So do you remember your first day? What was it like when you walked in? Were you nervous?
I was definitely nervous. Obviously coming in as an intern and really wanting to have that full-time offer, I was very nervous. But I think one thing that really struck me when I joined and when we entered the office is how collaborative and how friendly everyone is in the team. We have such an open space whereby the VPs will be sitting next to directors and analysts, and such an open culture here in Credit Suisse was really something that drew me as well. It's a very collaborative and team-based environment, and that to me was really a very critical factor why I chose to stay here.
Great. And Erica, I mean, you're newer, so have you had any aha moments, and is it what you expected?
I would say it was very different for me to say before I joined the banking industry. I would see on the newspaper all these IPOs and all these deals, but I had no idea how it would work behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And so being able to be part of that process was truly something that was like an aha moment for me, because now I know how much effort, due diligence, and the work it takes, and how so many different teams from around the world are involved in any deal. That was something that was completely mind-blowing. And Credit Suisse being such a global bank, we can have people from the offices in New York, in London, in Hong Kong, working on one deal in, say, Singapore or Hong Kong time, and I think that was truly incredible.
Yeah.
So you talk about New York and London, and I know that you both had a different experience on your training and onboarding, getting to go overseas to both those places. Maybe you could share a bit about it.
Sure. For global markets, we had 1 month training in New York, so earlier this year for me. So we had trainers in New York come in, and we went through a rundown, I would say a pretty accelerated program of finance, and going through the various, not just financial theory and finance, but also having simulations of the trading floor and having real life stock pitches that we would do. And we were evaluated not just in, say, how well we know our finance, so we had exams.
And this is in New York.
And this is in New York.
So you're out of your comfort zone already, and then you've got to go through.
Right. But it was great because we had people from around the world, all the global markets analysts from offices in London, Hong Kong, New York, and the US, all come together, and none of us knew each other before then, and by the end of the month we were all very good friends. And now I have friends in different parts of the world who are in CS offices, and many times I would need something from another colleague slash friend now, and that was great.
So there's a real network.
Yes.
Sense of collaboration.
Yes, and from day one, right? So
amazing.
Yeah, so it's been good.
And you're in London.
Yes, mine was London. I wish I was in New York, but London was great as well.
Fantastic.
So we had the training for 2 months, but prior to that, even as you join as an intern, you also have a training in Hong Kong. So as an intern, right before you start your internship, you have a 1 week training in Hong Kong. And if you do join us as full-time, you get a 2 month training here in London. So for us, it was the same thing. We had, analysts around the world, right? So we're not just talking about analysts in Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan. We're talking about analysts in London, in the EMEA region, right? In the LATAM region. So it's really, all the analysts from investment bank coming together, having this training. At the end of the day, it's not just about learning your modeling skills. It's also about networking, because it's a people's business. You need to know people, not just your bosses, but also within your batch. And it does help having someone perhaps in London, and if you need some information, it's easier to share if you've met that person previously.
Very true.
And networking is very important.
Very true. Yeah. So I'm going to change tack. We talked about some of the myths and debunking them when we started. Banking sometimes have the perception that it's a very male-driven industry. You work in functions that are particularly known for their being sort of quite masculine in terms of culture. How would you describe the culture, and is that a fair assessment?
I would say that, I guess, since we're here in the topic of women and diversity, here in Credit Suisse, we always look for people from varied backgrounds, and every time we go to a meeting, it's common to be honest, it's common to have much more males than females, but as a female banker, it's important for your voice to come out. And I think for that voice to come out, you need to be able to, every time you want to give an advice, to make sure that it's advice which is substantiated with your analysis. And I think being a female in banking, it's important for that voice to come out. And people do value that. And it's really heartening to see that even as a junior banker and a female banker in the team, people recognize your efforts. And I think that's really true for Credit Suisse. So I'd say that, the industry may be male-dominated, but I'd say that CES has taken a lot of efforts to encourage women and diversity. In fact, we have a women's network here in Credit Suisse, which just had a recent charity event.
It was fantastic, wasn't it? I went downstairs and there was like techno music going, and fair stalls, and it raised a significant amount of money.
Exactly.
It was so impressive.
And it's collaboration not just in investment bank, but also with the private banking side. So you see the whole team coming together, which is, I think it's pretty awesome.
I mean, I think the firm's commitment to D&I shines through in all aspects of our daily life. You just need to walk through the floor to see the wide range of nationalities and genders and age. It's a very powerful message. And what about you? You work in a different industry and a different experience.
Yes, so for global markets, I would say it's very similar. It's quite flat. So you can approach people who in your team who are more senior than you if you need some advice. And also, even as someone junior, your opinion is still very much valued. And being able to have the drive, but also the confidence to be able to come forward.
So have you had people that question your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, of course, sure.
And how have you responded to that?
I mean, of course, I would need some level of confidence, but I also need to take ownership and know what I need to know myself that I know what I'm talking about, and I need to take perhaps a leap of faith, but as long as I'm confident in what I'm saying, usually people will listen and there can be some feedback, and usually there is a situation where you would be listening to what the other person is saying as well. So I mean, it's a two-way street, right? So I mean, sure, but that's how you grow.
Definitely. So you both had to invest a lot of effort to get here. Application process is very rigorous. And now you're here. Do you see a career trajectory whilst you're here, and particularly for females? Can you see where you can, go to?
Right.
So I guess there's definitely a career trajectory, right? So I think we can begin for the audience who's perhaps right now looking at applying for Credit Suisse. So after that 10 to 12 week internship program, you will be assessed, and from there, if we see a good fit with the team, then we will offer you a full-time job as an incoming analyst. The analyst program in the investment banking side is 3 years, and after that 3 years of analyst program, there's the associate, which is another 3 years, and you move on to VP and director. But it's not just a progression upwards, but there's also a lot of lateral movements. In fact, recently we have someone from the team who joined us from Credit Suisse in New York, but he wasn't from investment bank. He was from the private banking side.
Right.
So we see a lot of movement and opportunities joining such a global investment bank such as Credit Suisse, which is not just strong in the investment bank and capital market side, but also in the PB side of things.
So I think over 40% of roles are filled internally, which is really impressive.
Yeah. So for global markets, it's similar. So there's the progression from being a summer analyst and then being full-time as an analyst, and there's progression from analyst, associate, VP, and so on as well. But being the trading floor, having so many different teams, and especially being very collaborative, it's not uncommon to move from one team to another. Right. But also you can move to different divisions of the bank as well, and it's not uncommon to hear people moving from one office to another. So Credit Suisse highly encourages internal mobility, and so if you wish to work in another office, you can do that as well. You can voice your opinion and say, this is something I want to try out.
Definitely.
Your managers are most likely willing to hear what your career progression, be it being in another office or being in another team.
Especially how strong Southeast Asia is. Credit Suisse here in Southeast Asia, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
It's got a very impressive franchise, that's for sure. So I was just fiddling around because we're going to go to the audience. So thank you very much for some questions. Really appreciate your candid answers. And maybe you could ask some tricky questions of them. So I've got my first question here. It says, so thank you, Elizabeth, for the question. It says, I notice you have degrees in global affairs and an internship in retail. How do you feel this particular experience has helped with your current work today? Good question.
Okay, so for global affairs, so when I was in college, I was actually debating between whether I should major in economics or global affairs. But even if I majored in economics, doesn't mean I don't have any less of an interest in global affairs. I think I'm still very much interested in current affairs, and I still do analyze and follow quite closely. How has it helped? I mean, in every single way, because global markets, financial markets are affected by current affairs on a daily basis and oftentimes in completely unexpected ways. And so having your own opinion on current affairs, not just regurgitating what the media is saying, but really analyzing, taking the facts, looking how that could potentially affect financial markets or any deals. In that sense, that my education in global affairs has helped me with that. For retail, I think it's given me exposure to how the retail business works. So in global markets, we work with all types of businesses, including retail. So having that exposure and seeing how a currently upcoming retail business is becoming so popular. I think seeing that from a few years ago and seeing how it's grown to now was good business experience, and seeing how their business strategy is implemented, not just as a consumer, but as someone who has worked in the business as well.
So it's a very thorough answer. Very good. But you raise a very good point about diversity, and diversity isn't just about gender or age or nationality, it's about the backgrounds that we have. And we were speaking before this session, and Katrina, you raised a really good point about how that diversity and how it relates to our clients.
Yeah, definitely. So, when you talk about diversity, a lot of people talk about, your race or where you come from. But really, diversity also comes from, what have you studied in school, but also how you were brought up. So, for instance, in my batch of analysts, we have analysts who studied history, those who also went to liberal arts. And that's very important, because if you want to give good advice to a client, you can't have a team filled with bankers who came from business school. It isn't going to work. You need a team of bankers who came from various backgrounds, who can approach a certain problem or a certain transaction, having seen it in different ways, and bouncing off ideas to be able to give the best advice we can give to our client. And clients really, appreciate that.
So I think we all know that, but obviously some companies do it better than other companies. What's your experience in Credit Suisse?
So what's my experience in Credit Suisse? I think it's amazing to see on the floor. I can tell you, our analysts and associate, there's about 25 to 30 of us. Not any single two individuals had the same background.
Wow.
And that's pretty amazing, because when we go out there and we speak to clients and we share ideas, and it's not just about the business itself, but connecting with the clients. Having varied backgrounds also mean that we can more easily relate to the client's experience, because at some point someone in the team would have experienced what the client would have experienced, and that's amazing.
Great. So we have another question on diversity, since we're on this theme. So what does the firm do to promote diversity? So one of you.
So there are lots of various sorts of events. Credit Suisse is actually very active when it comes to volunteering, or also celebrating other cultures and making sure that if there are public holidays, having such awareness. And when it came to, we had recently the charity event, there were many different kinds of non-profit organizations which were representative not just of culture, but also geographic location as well.
And the networks, that was one thing that really stuck out to me, the commitment to the networks.
Yes.
Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, so I think in terms of diversity as well, what we can talk about is, I think we promote a lot of lateral movement. So recently we also had a banker from Europe who came over to Singapore to have a secondment. So I think diversity, it also comes between, across offices, if you want to move from one region to another. So I think that's one thing that we do promote as well.
So this is an interesting question. What does a typical day look like for you?
Typical day.
They're laughing.
Never a typical day. There's never a typical day. I think I can share my experience working in the investment banking side. When you start off a day, it can start off as early as 8 a.m. if you have an early client meeting, but typically it starts at 9, 10 a.m. Not as early as global markets.
We're laughing. What time do you start?
Around 6:30.
So typically, when you start off the day, you obviously look at the calendar, and you go through a lot of, you have to do a lot of calls, especially if you're in the transaction. You want to make sure that you're not just doing the model, right? A lot of people think that investment banking is just about modeling, especially as a junior banker. But one thing that a myth to debunk is that as a junior banker, there's a lot of client exposure as well. In fact, right before this event, I was just in a client meeting, right? So I think there is a lot of client interaction. There will be some days you'll be interacting face-to-face with the client, whether it be flying off to Jakarta or KL for this meeting, or doing it over video, or at times it can be being in front of a computer, doing your model, and ensuring that the pitch book is ready.
Yeah.
So not a single day is the same, and I think that's the beauty of investment bank, because every day is different, and everything you're learning new things, and that keeps me here and keeps me excited all the time.
Great. So that's a good question. What gets you out of bed in the morning, and what time do you start?
For global markets, I start as a salesperson quite early in the morning because we have regional meetings which start at 7, and then more of an ASEAN call that starts around 8 o'clock. And thereafter, I think the mornings are the busiest for global markets because that's when markets open. If there's any news overnight, we'll be discussing that. We have to make the calls to clients. If we're working on deals, we need to make sure we get those emails on those calls out to clients. And like mentioned, there's no 2 days that are the same. So one day you could be at a conference.
Really like that?
It really is. One day you could be at a conference. The next day you could be meeting with a corporate. The next day you could be meeting with a research analyst who's come from New York to who's coming to speak with your own clients here, or you could just have a client meeting here. So every single day is quite different. And in being in the financial services industry, there are their earnings season as well. Right now we're in one too. So that tends to make things busier.
The backdrop for an interesting space to work.
It's definitely an exciting industry to work in.
So we have another good question, and it's saying, this has all been really helpful, but what about the soft skills? So what are the top 3 soft skills you both think enable you to be successful in your roles?
For global markets, I think you need to be organized, you need to be time efficient, and you need to be able to express yourself in not only in a logical manner, but also in an accurate way as well. People are working in a very pressured environment, but also people don't have a lot of time. People are always very busy. So if you're not able to be very concise with what you need to say, I think communication would be the absolute most important soft skill.
Yeah, and that links into what you were saying before about having a voice and being heard.
Yeah.
I think in investment banking, I agree, right? Communication is very important. At the end of the day, banking, investment banking, capital markets, global markets, it's a people's business. Yeah. It's not just communicating well with the team, but also communicating well with the clients. It's a client-facing role, it's a front office role, and obviously communication, whether it be face-to-face or through email, is very important. I think another soft skill, which is really critical, is, I guess, being driven and having that passion. And passion shows not just in your work in the banking, but also what are your passion and interests outside of banking. Clients want to talk about sometimes what you do outside of work, and if you have some common interests, obviously that clicks well as well. So
I think passion absolutely critical in anything that you're doing.
I agree.
But when we talked about culture before, for me that was one of my main takeaways. The passion that people feel here at Credit Suisse is phenomenal and really comes through.
Yeah. Definitely.
Great, so we're going. Thank you for all your questions. What I'm going to do now is do some quick fire questions. We didn't practice for this, by the way. So I'm going to ask you some questions. Answer with what first springs to mind, but sort of short, sharp answers.
Sure.
Are you ready? 3 words to describe Credit Suisse.
Collaborative, driven, team-based.
Great. If you weren't a banker, what would you be?
Perhaps consulting or biologist or a detective.
Very diverse.
Liberal arts.
Your background. What do you love most about your job?
Not a single day is the same. You're learning everything. You're learning things new every day.
Great. And you've got the tricky question. What do you like less about your job?
I would say the early mornings. I'm not particularly a morning person, but you get used to it.
Great. What about female role models? Do you have one?
Sheryl Sandberg.
Very good. What about you?
Jane Goodall.
Elaborate.
She's probably the world's most famous female primatologist.
Excellent. And where do you see yourself in 5 years?
To be good at what I'm doing.
I like that. If I had to describe banking, fun, challenging, fast, what one would you pick?
Fast.
Very good. Very fast. Very fast. So we're nearing the end of the hour, and I'm going to jump back to one of the questions from the audience, and that is, parting thoughts. Do you have any advice for people who are watching this, thinking about applying? Do you have words of wisdom that you can perhaps share with them?
I think in the application process, the most important part is to make sure your story comes through. You need to be able to recognize, and not just recognize, but be able to effectively communicate, these are my strengths, these are my skills, these are the experiences. Even though it may not be relevant, you may not think it's relevant, but it can be relevant in so many different ways. And if you're able to make that connection, people are going to be willing to listen to you, and having a compelling story which would differentiate yourself from other applicants, I think is absolutely the most important part.
I mean, I like what you say about a story, about knowing what your unique offering is. I think that's really important.
I think for potential interns wanting to join having this analyst job in investment banking, what's really important is we need to see your drive and the energy to do this job, right? It's not an easy job, but I'd say it's a job that's really satisfying. We want people who are motivated and to show interest outside of school, right? So when we look at your CV, we want to be able to differentiate yourself. And how do you do that? We want to see that you're doing things outside of school, that, if you're really interested in finance, have you done certain things that would come out? And obviously it's also about telling a story. Every single CV is different. You can imagine the number of applicants applying for this role, but at the same time, we want to see who you are behind the CV. We want to see what drives you as a person and why you're interested to do this role.
Great. And what about the actual application process? I imagine a lot of people are watching thinking, oh my gosh, it seems so daunting. Any tips there?
I'd say things like cover letter and like your CV are things that you should already be fairly confident in everything. Especially the CV, you should know it inside out. And after those kind of basic things, there is the online tests that you need to pass, and then thereafter is the interview process, and there's usually several rounds of that. Any tips? I think you need to give the best in every single aspect, because every little bit counts. But if I were to say which is the most important part, I would say it's the interviews.
It's definitely the interview. So, we when we interview candidates, it comes out very clearly those who are just applying for this role just because their friends tell them to, and those that...
So you can pick it.
We can pick it. Especially this whole week I've been going through a few interviews, and it's really, it comes out naturally. And I think what we really encourage students to really read up about the industry, read about Credit Suisse, read up about Credit Suisse here in Singapore, here in the region, in APEC. And I think it comes out if you have done your due diligence, banker terms, due diligence, that would come out. And it's really heartening to see candidates who have really done their research and know so much about the company. And I think that obviously is a plus point for the interview.
Great. So I hope you've all learnt something today. I've certainly enjoyed our discussion, so thank you. And thank you for being so open and candid and sharing your stories. Some takeaways I've got: be passionate, be bold, follow your dreams no matter which path you take, study hard, and our applications for the internship program are now open. So if you're interested, and we really hope you are, please head to our website, which is www.credit-suisse.com. There's a lot more information there. Please read up, continue to ask us your questions, and apply. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.